GSM operators propose 40% tariff hike for calls, SMS and data. Central Bank of Nigeria warns Nigerian banks to be vigilant of transactions related to Benin Republic. Global stocks struggling for footing after U.S. Central Bank raised interest rates by 50 basis points, plus U.S. rate hike and gains in the global market puts more pressure on the Naira. This is Business Express on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA, and we are reaching you from Abuja, the nation's capital. I am Leakating Baba Tunde. You're welcome. The Central Bank of Nigeria has warned Nigerian banks to be vigilant regarding transactions related to Benin Republic due to intelligence that suggests the country is increasingly becoming a drug trafficking transit and consumption hub in West Africa. The Apex Bank gave the advice in a circular signed by Asuko Evelyn for the Director of Banking Supervision titled Need to Implement Enhanced Measures for Customer Onboarding and Due Diligence on Existing Accounts and Transactions Related to Benin Republic. The bank called for additional measures such as reclassifying related customers and conducting enhanced due diligence. CBN also asked Nigerian banks to strengthen Know Your Customer KYC and Customer Due Diligence CDD policies as mandated by regulation. Telecommunications companies are proposing a 40% increase in the cost of calls, SMS and data to the Nigerian Communications Commission as a result of the rising cost of running a business in the nation. In a letter titled Impact of the Economic and Security Issues on the Telecommunications Sector by the communications companies under the aegis of the Association of Licensed Telecommunications Operators of Nigeria to the NCC, the companies proposed that the price floor of calls will increase from 6 naira 4 kobo to 8.95 naira, while the price cap of SMS will increase from 4 naira to 5 naira 61 kobo. The letter said the telecommunication industry has been financially impacted by the nation's economic recession in 2020 and the effects of the ongoing Ukraine-Russia crisis, which had resulted in an increase in energy costs, increasing their operating expenses by as much as 35%. And still with energy, Secretary General of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, Mohammed Sanusi Barkindo, says the organization will continue to collaborate through declaration of cooperation's actions to help support market stability and economic growth. Barkindo said these at the 62nd meeting of the Joint Technical Committee via video conference. He explained that it is vital to have stable energy markets for both producers and consumers as exhibited during the pandemic. He therefore urged global leaders to continue to support the type of multilateralism exhibited in the Declaration of Cooperation to ensure an unhindered, stable and secure flow of energy to the world.
More than 7 million barrels a day cannot be made up from elsewhere. The spare capacity just does not exist. However, its potential loss through either sanctions or voluntary actions is clearly rippling through energy markets. The crises we face are causing huge volatility with daily price swings of more than $5 a barrel.
Figures released March 2022 by the Debt Management Office shows that Nigeria's total public debt stock increased to 39.56 trillion naira in 2021 from 32.92 trillion naira in 2022. The figures show that the total debt includes new borrowings by the federal government and the subnationals, which is said to help in financing the budget deficit, capital projects, and support economic recovery. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) has warned that debt vulnerabilities remains elevated in sub-Saharan Africa, with no fewer than 20 countries in the region either at high risk of debt distress or already in debt distress. Now, Sam Amadi, Associate Professor and Director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, is seated somewhere in Nasarawa State for this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Sam, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for the program.
Great. So, how is Nasarawa this morning before I shoot?
Nasarawa is cool. I'm fine. The weather is okay and traffic, right? Traffic always there. But
always the one street state capital, right? So, a recent IMF survey reveals that Venezuela is topping the list of countries with the highest debt, with its debt to GDP ratio at about 307%, followed by Japan and Greece in that order. Nigeria is not among the top 12, but then there's so much worry by Nigerians about Nigeria's debt to GDP ratio. What will be your position on this?
Well, I think clearly, Venezuela has been a basket case a long while due to a lot of mismanagement, just like Zimbabwe was at some point. But again, the Nigeria debt to GDP is sustainable. If you look at the benchmark of the World Bank, other financial institutions, Nigeria has not gone beyond that threshold. I mean, countries like the US, China, Venezuela, you mentioned, Japan, they are more indebted if you look at debt to GDP. Now, but the real problem with Nigerian debt profile is when you look at debt servicing to GDP. So if you do the comparatives, we are far, way beyond even the prudential benchmark. So that's the problem. What that means, therefore, is that Nigeria is spending more of its revenue servicing the debts. At some point, it was 98% in May 2021. I think at that point, we were spending 9.8 naira out of every 100 servicing debts alone, and just 2% of our 100 naira revenue dealing with capital and recurrent, and therefore we're even borrowing to pay even for personnel. So debt to GDP is good, but debt servicing to revenue is critical, and revenue to GDP is actually tells you more story around the vulnerability and the precarity of the situation. So in a sense, we have even room to borrow more. But the crisis, like the Minister of Finance has always observed, is a crisis of production. So our revenue is shrinking, our debts are increasing. And the economic formula is when the average interest is increasing more than the average debt, then there's a problem in the way. What that means, therefore, that you'll be spending a lot servicing, not even paying the debts. That's why if you look at the comparatives, South Africa has more debt to GDP. We are better than them, but they have a far higher revenue to debt, and of course, lower debt servicing to revenue.
Okay,
so clearly, even Kenya. So the problem is not just the GDP. We are okay. The problem is when you now denominate, compare debt to debt with debt servicing and your revenue, and your debt to revenue, then it begins to look much more precarious for Nigeria.
Okay, so the world is undergoing a phase, as we all know, with the issue around the war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, do you see this affecting Nigeria's income? How will it be affecting Nigeria's revenue when we need this revenue as well to service our debts?
Well, in many ways, I mean, globally, this is not just Nigerian crisis. If you look at the global trend, we've seen inflation increase everywhere. The first thing that the war does for us is that, in a way, it makes subsidy over bloated. If you look at the subsidy regime, it has increased drastically. Why? Because we are still importing crude for our, we're not refining, we're importing the fuel and other waste resources for our use. So it increases even though we ought to be earning more from the increase in gas, in oil and gas price because of the war and other factors, but we are also owing more, we are spending more to import these finished products. The second thing you see is that, of course, that has impact on both energy pricing and also basic transport. So there's a network of impacts that this creates. Again, if you look at the food aspect, where both Russia and Ukraine control about that global supply of staples like wheat and others, you see that, of course, the cost of basics will go up bread. And then even when we go to the substitutes, like cassava or like potato, it has an impact of increasing the price of those substitutes, further increasing or worsening food inflation. You see something like 17.9%. Will go worse. And then when you marry that to domestic challenges around terrorism and banditry, and of course we are getting to flooding now. If you don't manage that well, it creates its own impact on agriculture. So all these create inflationary pressure, and also the macroeconomic stability is fair, but again, back to capacity to produce. So if we had ready substitutes for these products and we can ramp them up quickly, then it will mitigate the rate shock, the impact, the increase in their prices. So the government is going to deal with so many headwinds. One of them is, of course, the fallout of the war in Ukraine. But again, the impact of the COVID, we are easing out from COVID globally with vaccines, and of course, the fact that we can better manage the COVID impact, and therefore the economies are not shutting down. But we see what's happening in China, that we could also enter into a new wave of that. So that's the problem we have right now. How do we sustain the gains and stave off the adverse impact of this headwind?
Okay, to briefly tell us how the subnationals can work with the federal government in bridging this debt ratio to GDP problems we have.
Well, the problem we have is that even though our economy is a national economy, largely derived from oil, we've had this notion where states behave as if they are really a sub-economy. We don't have a sub-economy or a sub-national economy. So the implication is that, for example, fiscal federalism, the states are allowed largely to do what they want to do. Under President Obasanjo, there was a bill by Nkonjuwala to try to restrain the states in their spend and how they use local government funds. But the Supreme Court declared it as unconstitutional. So the crisis we have is a mismatch between our economy and our constitutional legal order. And so what it creates is the notion that states are not very respectful or aligned to the fundamentals of the national economic management structure. So, for example, we'll talk about cost of governance and investment in productive activity. Now that we are going through this crisis, we should expect more state investment in productive activity and less on ornaments, less on political projects and feel-good projects. So if states can align and invest more in the things that can help to agriculture and the value chains that will help to increase production, then they will be helping federal government to manage the impact of the inflation arising all these factors. Again, if states can also invest in their workforce, retool them, make them more efficient, then collectively the economy grows. What we are seeing is that much of the federal government's heavy lifting in economic management is not being complemented by prudential policies and resource management at the states. And so this mismatch, this misalignment between a national economy and a physical, political, constitutional structure that allows states a lot of independence without the capacity of the federal government to influence political behavior, is actually the problem we're going to have. So if the government at the center, through the political party, that's the ruling party, can orchestrate a much more aligned subnational economic management, it will help to mitigate the crisis and enhance the effectiveness of all the fiscal and monetary policies that the federal government is putting out to manage the crisis.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sam Amadi, joining us right from Nasarawa State there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Do have a nice day. It is universally agreed that the development of every society is dependent on its currency worth. Hence, the responsibility of paying tax due to authorities should be taken seriously, just as the tax being paid is expected to be utilized and properly managed for the purpose of development by leadership at all levels. Benny Adams in this report takes us through why citizens should pay tax.
This structure, like many others across the country, does not only depict decay in infrastructure, but paints a picture of a system witnessing fallen standards, poor welfare, and near absence of research, among other lacks. This was the case of many tertiary institutions of learning across the country some years back. But with an unwavering belief in the ideology that education is the check to cash in the future, the present government came to the rescue with an investment worth more than 1.7 trillion naira of capital intervention to the nation's tertiary institutions. This investment has seen to the provision of conducive learning environment equipped with facilities that motivate productivity of both students and lecturers. This is made possible by profits from education tax,
including the provision of lecture theatre. They were all built with proceeds of taxation, and they continue to be built using education tax that people pay through their profits annually. What about the auditoriums that you use for purpose of seminars in the education sector, the libraries and laboratories in colleges of education nationwide, the polytechnics everywhere in Nigeria?
Tax utilization in the country is not limited to that sector. Massive road and rail infrastructure across the country enthuse the citizens who now see where taxpayers' money go. In the health sector, it is a transformation that many say is the first.
Children have increased access to health care. Pregnant women, access prophylactic care. We have innovations in terms of diagnostics, in terms of treatment.
It is not as if governments wake up to see this money. It is the deposit you made through tax payment that government is using to building these medical centers, employing doctors to work there, employing nurses, providing drugs for the sick, the burdens, all the infrastructure to see.
The security sector is perhaps where the utilization of taxpayers' money is being utilized the most.
Funding of the Nigerian police, the army, the navy, the air force, so that they're able to provide security to our lives and properties of citizens of the Federal Republic is being done using taxpayers' money. Go back to agriculture. There are funds all over there for farming and agriculture-related research, including provision of agri-loan and support, irrigation schemes that are built in the villages, in the local government that we come from, in the state that we live. Then come to other aspect of it, the basic amenities you use. Yes, there's not the kind of water you need in the village or the place you live. There is electricity, infrastructure is being built.
Experts say much more could have been done if more people get to pay their taxes. And that explains why the Federal Inland Revenue Service is of the view that there is need for increased voluntary tax compliance by those who are eligible to pay tax. In Abuja, Benny.
There's a growing concern amongst nations as the war between Russia and Ukraine continues to disrupt supply chains with attendant consequences. In mitigating this, the Central Bank of Nigeria is promoting a paradigm shift amongst graduates and undergraduates of tertiary institutions from seeking white-collar jobs to entrepreneurship development in the country. Musa Abubakar has been looking at the tertiary institution entrepreneurship scheme ties.
Come out of university to start learning that process.
This group of experts are keen to get the top 5 entrepreneurial innovations to access 900 million naira TIES grant of the Central Bank of Nigeria. After reducing the size of institutions competing for the grant from 140 to 30, this second stage of the selection process will further choose the top 5 most commercially viable ideas. This is coming at a time the global economy is in dire straits, stemming from the war between Russia and Ukraine with no end in sight.
At activities that are, job stimulating, that will contribute to economic growth, things like the creative industry that we know a lot of our youths really do. We're looking at agribusiness. Agri is priority of President Muhammadu Buhari and the governor of the central bank, Godwin Emefiele. We're also looking at, things that will contribute to exports, things that will employ people.
The Tertiary Institution Entrepreneurship Scheme TIES is developed by the Central Bank of Nigeria in partnership with academia to unleash the potentials of the Nigerian graduate entrepreneurs. This is by providing reorientation, training, and innovative financing model to promote entrepreneur ecosystem. Aisha Suleiman is a beneficiary of the term loan component of the scheme.
I intend to utilize my money in buying more machineries, because before now we actually take our products for nutshelling and grading. So with this money, I'll kind of get mine.
Equity investment is the third component of the TIES program, expected to inject fresh capital to startups and expansion of businesses by the time it takes off. It is expected that in line with the President's quest to create millions of jobs in 10 years, this will go a long way in bridging the unemployment gap in the country. In Abuja, I am Musa Abubakar.
And so let's take a trip to the commodities market. It was a positive start for the Nigerian equities market as investors recorded massive gains in the first trading day of the week this Wednesday. The NGX All-Share Index advanced by 0.98% to close at 50,126.41 basis points, with market capitalization advancing to 27.023 trillion naira and gaining 262 billion naira. 669.2 million shares exchanged hands in 7,251 deals valued at 5.98 billion naira. Union Bank, Transcorp, and ICO Insurance were the most active shares. We move to the global scene, where stock movements show that Ukraine war remains in focus, and Boste Abel has that update.
The Federal Reserve on Wednesday raised its benchmark interest rate by half a percentage point, its biggest hike in 2 decades, as it looks to rein in inflation running at a 40-year high. Following that, European markets are set to climb on Thursday, tracking global sentiment. Britain's FTSE 100 is set to gain 87 points to 7,580. Germany's DAX is expected to jump by 315 points to 14,286, and France's CAC 40 is seen around 139 points higher at 6,535. Shares in Asia were higher in Thursday trade following the U.S. Federal Reserve's interest rate. Mainland Chinese stocks were in positive territory as they returned to trade following days of holidays. The Shanghai Composite gained 0.74%, the Hang Seng Index 0.43%, while Nikkei dipped 0.11%. U.S. stock futures fell slightly after the Federal Reserve raised rates by half a point, and the major averages rallied to end the day. Futures tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 0.10%. S&P 500 futures and Nasdaq 100 futures also depreciated. Meanwhile, investors in African markets are expecting a positive twist when figures begin to roll in. Boss said they able.
And we end this edition here. The program returns tomorrow at 3 p.m. Have a nice day and God bless Nigeria.